right, guys. So today, for your remote learning experience, you're going to start picking where you're going to pick up where you left off Wednesday during our all remote day. On Wednesday, I walked you through the steps of writing the introduction and modeled it for you, even allowing you to just take what I had written and adopt it as your own. For the body paragraphs, I'm not going to be quite so generous, maybe is the word, although I'm generous certainly with my instruction and help, but I'm not going to just hand you the paragraph. And this is largely because the evidence that you have chosen to support your assessment of the speaker's mental health will likely be different person to person, so it won't match everybody's. Secondly, I also, gave us the opportunity on Tuesday in class to put like your assessment in your own words, and you will use some of that work in the body paragraph. Today's assignment is just to work on one of them. So the second paragraph 2 of the essay, first paragraph is the introduction. The second paragraph is the first body paragraph, contains 5 components. Okay. And I have them broken down for you right here in this top box. We have a topic sentence, context for the quote from the text, cited appropriately, the analysis of the quote, and what that means is how does it support the claim or thesis you're making, and then the closing sentence. Okay. For the topic sentence, you need to say specifically what the focus of this paragraph will be. It makes sense if I go up to our example from the introduction paragraph that I mentioned the wanderer first. It then makes sense to feature that first. If I had switched the order, that would have been fine too. If I had put the wife's lament first in my thesis, I probably would mention the wife's lament first in my body paragraph. I would. It's not like I would. The topic sentence needs to mention some key words from the prompt itself. Okay, so the prompt itself says I have to explain the impact that exile by force has on a person's mental and emotional health. The topic sentence needs to affect or be present in this, those terms need to be present in this topic sentence, okay? So I've mentioned emotional trauma of both loss and isolation. I might just say exile by force. Emerges from the very beginning of the wanderer. That works because I want to use that language. So I might put mental and emotional trauma just to kind of add that in there since it was mentioned in the prompt. All right, that sentence is great. That works. That gets the job done. Next step says I need to provide some context for the textual evidence for the quote. Now, what I mean by this is you're not going to give me the quote as the next thing after your first sentence in this body paragraph. You don't do it. So many of you are still going to do it. But you should not. Kids often struggle with this. If you've ever heard the ICE acronym, this is the first step in ICE. It's introduce a quote. Maybe I should underline it so it's a little clearer. Introduce the quote. I need about 2 sentences of what's happening or what has happened in this poem up to the point where you're going to be taking some lines. Okay, so this is what we mean when we say give me some context. Context is what's going on around the thing you're going to be talking about or that you're talking about, to understand exactly where this fits into the poem. Is it at the beginning? Is it in the middle? Is it near the end? You could use that as an indicator of sorts in these sentences. You might summarize what you already know or learned in the first part of the poem up to this line, but it's from the very beginning. You might just say, at the very beginning of the poem, comma, blah, 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 blah. Right away, the speaker says, and then we move on to step 3, entering the quote. So that's context. Step 2, that's the I in ICE. Introduce, cite, explain. Okay. So now let's talk about the C in ICE. Let me bold it and underline it for us. That is the cite. Okay. We're going to incorporate our quotation that we have isolated. I'm not a big fan of just sticking it in there, just here it is, and there's nothing like at the start of it. So you might say something, in stanza 5, comma, the speaker says, or in stanza 5, comma, the poet writes. That's fine. Something to, connect the quote to the flow of what you're saying. Now, there are some rules, and I'll attach the PowerPoint's attached to the same posting again. Depending on how many lines you decided to quote, lines of the poem, not sentences, but lines of the poem, you have some different rules, and I provided you an example of what this would look like if you have cited 3 or less lines of poetry. Okay, you're going to see these slashes here. Those indicate the break between one poetic line and the next. Notice that I've capitalized the I and in, and that's because it's capitalized in the poem. Therefore, I'm going to imitate that. Same thing here. Now, when you do 3 lines or less and you incorporate it into your essay, you'll use quotation marks. I got to put those there to indicate that these are not your words. But it's going to exist in the paragraph, just like as if you were writing, left to right, your full, with the exception of the margins on your document. It's going to go all the way across. It's going to be normal. No slashes. I'm sorry, I lied, wrong spot. Slashes between the poetic lines, closing punctuation after the citation. Citation doesn't have an author, so therefore we're going to put the title of the poem. There's no comma between these two. Note that. And then I put my line numbers with a dash in between. If you are citing 4 or more lines of poetry, we do what's called a block indent. And that means you're writing your paragraph along, and then when you're ready to incorporate this quote, you're going to hit enter and tab, and it's going to be indented in farther. Notice that I did that intentionally here. This is still aligned with the margin of whatever I'm writing. This is not. Notice some differences here. There's no quotation marks. Why, Mrs. Gerst? Well, the block indent, physically making that visual separation from your words, is the indication that they're not your words. You don't need slashes because you are going to copy it exactly as it exists in the poem. Notice that the capitalization is still all imitated. And in this case, the closing punctuation, if it exists for the last line that you're featuring, happens before the citation. Just for reference, if I were to go back then if I were going back to my paragraph, I would actually move over and start back here because it's still part of the paragraph. It's just that we've done a block indent. Step 4 is the analysis, and this is where I'm going to get the opportunity to really kind of hone in on literary analysis skills. Students always do a nice job of finding quotes that support their claims, and then they say, this supports my claim, and that's about it. They just kind of say it does, and they don't really explain how. How? What words captured in the quote that you chose reinforce the idea of the mental and emotional trauma that exile by force has caused the wanderer? How? What words? What did it say? You don't just tell me, it says it. I know it says it. You just gave me the quote. How does it prove what you're saying it proves? That's hard to master. So that's my focus with this essay. And lastly, we need just a closing wrap-up sentence. Oh, and by the way, this analysis part, this is the E in ICE. Introduce the quote, cite the quote, explain the relevance of the quote. Okay. And lastly, you need some kind of closing sentence that brings me back full circle to the topic sentence. Don't just copy it exactly, rephrase it somehow, but it should summarize what you just said before we transition to our next point. So listen, you're going to unsubmit the introduction document from yesterday on the same posting. I'm going to change the days on the posting itself. I think the posting just said, Wednesday, September 30th. I'm going to put Wednesday, September 30th dash, and I'm going to have it go all the way through Friday. And the reason for that is because I have different cohorts working on this on different days when they're not in school. Because the day they're in school, they're working on it. We're going to take our Unit 2 vocab quiz. So you're going to unsubmit that document so that you can continue working on the same one as the introduction. Okay. So if you have questions, send me a message, and that should be good for now. Okay. Bye.